but I love that you're talking about entering into these systems, cross-culturally with a lot of humility, with, and because I think that's how we achieve health in social systems is through humility.
And I think the same thing of just like being open-handed of like, we see this all the time in the Bible. Like God uses unlikely people to accomplish his work. And I feel like I'm a very unlikely person. And I guess there's humility in that, but there's also an acknowledgement of like, I'm okay living open-handed and just trusting that, God's going to bring the staff here. He's going to take the staff away when it's time. And that's been really neat just to see the longevity in the 14 years that God has been faithful to work through that. And I guess the challenge is for me to keep my hands open.
Hello, welcome to the Simple Charity Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Grosso. Today on the show, I interview Sarah Beth Fentress, the Executive Director of 127 Worldwide, a nonprofit based in Raleigh, North Carolina that forms partnerships with leaders around the world. Sarah and I were friends back when I lived in Durham, North Carolina, and it was great to have her on the show to share about her ministry and to learn from her. She is an incredibly relational person, and she uses that gifting to build strong relationships across geographic and cultural boundaries as she leads 127 Worldwide. This is a unique ministry because they don't have a predetermined set of programs and interventions that they implement. Rather, their approach is to identify, befriend, and equip local leaders to implement the visions that God has given them. So join me for a conversation today about what healthy cross-cultural engagement looks like with Sarah Beth Fentress. This is your podcast, so as always, please send me your thoughts, your questions, and your suggestions. And if this show has been useful or helpful or encouraging to you, please give us a rating and a review. 5 stars would be amazing. And Spotify or an Apple Podcast, or even in both, that would be amazing. We're so glad you're with us today.
Hi, my name is Melissa, and I serve as a Simple Charity philanthropic advisor to individuals, couples, families, foundations, and family offices in the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area of North Carolina, but also to clients around the country. If you're curious about your own generosity journey and would like help thinking through a philanthropic strategy with intentionality to discern where God is calling you to love people, to find excellent nonprofits to partner with, or to understand the impact of your current grant making, I would love to connect and share more about Simple Charity's philanthropic advising offerings. You can connect with me at melissahall@simplecharity.org. That's Melissa Hall at simplecharity.org. And you can learn more about us at simplecharity.org. That's simplecharity.org.
Well, Sarah Beth, welcome to the Simple Charity Podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's so good to be with you. Sarah Beth and I knew each other when I lived in Raleigh, so I'm in Atlanta now. We've stayed in touch, and she is the Executive Director of 127 Worldwide, which we're going to talk all about. Also joining me today is Emily. Hi, Emily.
Hello. So good to be here.
Emily is our impact analyst at Simple Charity, and she is joining me from Duluth, Georgia.
I'm actually in Virginia right now.
Oh, you're in Virginia right now.
But yes, I do live in Duluth. I live near Bryan in Georgia.
Yes. So originally from Nova, Northern Virginia for the uninitiated, and now down here in Atlanta. Well, Sarah Beth and Emily, what are you both grateful for today?
Want me to go first?
I was going to say, in our usual staff meetings, Brian always calls on me if I don't go first. So I was going to volunteer myself.
You go.
I'm grateful for the mornings. I feel like being able to just wake up and, like Brian prayed about earlier, just being reminded that his mercies, but also the gift of the day is so special. I feel like I felt that this morning, so I'm grateful for the morning.
Wonderful.
Great.
How about you, Sarah Beth?
The first thing that came to mind was springtime. I feel like winter has kind of been a little challenge for me the last few years, so I love everything about spring, the newness, the weather, March Madness, Easter. I'm just excited to be in this season. So
That's wonderful. I'll share your gratitude for spring in general, minus the allergies, which are, I think, currently contributing
True.
to me being a little bit sick. So if my voice sounds a little bit off on this podcast, it's in part I
Yeah.
blame the Georgia pollen. Um,
I was going to say it's about time for that yellow coating over everything in Georgia and North Carolina. So
I
I don't know if it
know.
started where you are yet.
Yes, it has started, unfortunately. Well, Sarah Beth, we share something really special in common, and that is that we've spent a decent amount of time in Kenya. So I
Mhm.
spent 2 summers in Kenya when I was in college. I first went to Kenya when I was 12 years old, had a deep impact on my life. Still wrapping my Kenya bracelet right here.
I see.
And when did you first go to Kenya? And can you tell us the story about when you first went
Yeah.
to Kenya?
Yeah, I first went to Kenya in 2007. So I was working with a different ministry that used sports to build relationships to share the gospel. And this Kenyan lady was starting a school and had just Googled Christian sports equipment or something like that. And she wanted some PE equipment for her school. And so our ministry popped up, and it wasn't really what we did as an organization, like collect sports equipment to take to Kenya. And so my boss at the time was just like, we don't know who this lady is. There's so much, corruption in the world. Like, let's just be careful. And so the Kenyan lady and I were pen pals for a year. And finally, I went back to my boss a year later and was like, I've got to go see what this lady is doing. Like, I'm just hearing these stories of rural Western Kenya. She's starting a school. She's just has a lot of passion. And so finally, my boss endorsed, like, take a small team, go do like some soccer camps or clinics at the school, kind of the spies in Canaan, like bring back a report of what you see. And that really just started a trajectory. For me, it was a big, like, as I look at my life, that was a big life shift of kind of the beginning of me steering away from sports ministry more to this idea of, I know we're going to talk about it more later, but empowering local people who are doing great work and just need somebody to advocate for them. So that was in 2007. And then 127 actually didn't start until 4 years later, but that would say that was the beginning piece of it.
Yeah, the catalyst, the seed, maybe.
Yes.
Well, and how did you? So you're the founder of 127. So
I am.
What happened in those 4 years, and what led you to want to start this nonprofit?
Yeah, so I think this is true of many founders. It was never my plan to start a nonprofit organization, but I saw a need. I had some strong convictions, and I was actually trying to find ways to work with other people who could do kind of what I had in my mind. And that's still what I challenge people to do. Like, if there's any way you can find another way to do it instead of starting your own, I love collaboration. I love just working together. But in 2011, I kind of just laid out a Gideon's fleece of, God, I'm going to give you 6 months of trying this and seeing if it's what you want to happen. And I mean, that was 14 years ago. So
Wow.
The fleece stood.
That's awesome. And by the way, as
Yeah.
I'm asking these questions, Emily, feel free to like jump in at any time and ask your own questions if anything stands out to you. So you how did you know, like after that 6 months, that this is something that you wanted to pursue?
Well, I think I was just, I love telling stories. And so by that time, we had a few partners in East Africa. The Kenyan lady was our first partner that I met in 2007. But just, I love sharing stories and then getting people's reaction. And it was just like people wanted to get involved in what we were doing. So I took some small teams over and just kind of started this little momentum that kept building. And, we felt like after a little bit of time, like we have, um, the speed of the momentum, it looks like it's going in a positive direction. Like, let's just keep seeing what God's going to do. And that's kind of been it's been like a grassroots movement the whole time. It's just like, let's see what doors are opening, see where God's moving, and join him and working with him there.
Love it. And what was anything hard, Sarah Beth, about starting a nonprofit?
Yeah, I laughed when
in
you
those
sent me
early
just some like,
days.
you sent me some potential questions about
Yeah.
like when I made a hard decision or had to
Mm.
make some pivots. I'm like, that literally sums up the last 14 years of like
Mm.
hard things happen. We have to figure out a way to around it, and then we work together to do that. But if you think about even in the last 5 years, the global pandemic and just
Mm.
kind of short-term missions, a lot of this like when helping hurts controversy. I don't know if you guys have ever talked about that. I'm happy to talk more about it, but just like
We have,
healthy
yes.
engagement. And so it was like problem after problem. And I actually love just having hard conversations and kind of stirring the pot a little bit with
Yeah.
Christianity in America. So it just seemed like a good fit to, you know, not let people get too comfortable, to keep challenging people to think differently about things. So that's still something I really love about what we're doing.
I was just gonna ask the exact question that Brian asked. I was thinking about, because I'm not in the position of being an executive director or founder of a nonprofit. I was like, but I think being in close proximity to it, I see all the challenges and the workload that goes into like not only putting in the care towards your organization yourself, but trying to get other people to care about it too. So it's
Right.
funny that Brian
Mm.
asked that, because I was gonna ask the exact same thing. But I just loved, especially in your video that you have on your website, this even just point that helping can hurt. I think I
Mhm.
actually, for preference, I studied like anthropology, and a lot of what we talk about is
Mm.
like, how can we help in a way that doesn't hurt? And I think that question is so weighted, and there are no easy answers to it at all, especially because we're in systems and there's relationships that we have to navigate, and at all levels. I feel like it's a really complex question. So if you have any thoughts on that and how your organization itself kind of seeks to navigate that, I feel
Yeah.
like that was one point of the video that really stood out to me.
Yeah, I feel like there are a lot of people who know way more than I do about healthy engagement in other cultures. But I have learned a lot, and mostly I've learned from mistakes that I've made. So I think maybe one gifting that I have is I'm okay just to admit my mistakes and help people learn from those. I feel like a lot of people in leadership try to maybe cover up their mistakes. I'm like, no, let's try to avoid the mistakes that I made by heeding my advice in the future. So I would just point your listeners to the Chalmers Center in Chattanooga. They do a lot of work on just cross-cultural training, short-term missions. They're the people who wrote the book When Helping Hurts. And I even love the next book after that, which is not as popular, but it's called Becoming Whole. So I don't know if you
Arguably
put
more
links.
important.
Yeah,
Becoming
I
whole is
really think
more
that
important,
should
I
have been
think.
the first book
Yeah.
because it deals more with like the heart issues of the why behind the what. And just like I said earlier, I'm very aware of American culture and where we've kind of missed the mark. And I actually enjoy stirring the pot a little bit with Americans of like, hey, we're comfortable and we value efficiency, but those aren't always the most important things that the gospel spotlights. And so kind
Mm.
of having those conversations, I think is really, it's important. And it's kind of in a weird way, really fun for me to challenge people like that.
You're the contrarian, yeah, stirring the
I
pot.
I think that would surprise people who don't know me really well because I don't come across that way, but I just like to help people think about things in a different way.
Yeah, yeah. What's
So,
like a misconception about, overseas work that you have heard in the church that you think would be important
mhm.
to kind of stir the pot and
Oh,
and
you're
to
asking me to
challenge?
stir the pot right now.
I am here
So I'll
live for
preface
everyone.
it with I feel like I'll make some blanket statements. So this is not true of everyone, but I feel like I kind of grew up thinking, let's do a youth group mission trip. We're going to go paint a building. We're going to take pictures in front of that building and then come back and show the church.
Mm,
And I never really like I never crossed my mind like there were actually painters in that community that could do a much better job than I could. They
mm,
didn't actually need me to come paint. What they need us to come do is just walk alongside of them, learn and listen about what's God doing the other 51 weeks of the year when we're not here, and how
yep.
can we help spur that along. And so I think this kind of like hero mentality is something I really struggle with. It's particularly now I'm primarily a fundraiser for our organization, and a lot of even the nonprofit world, we're supposed to call the donors the heroes of the story, which I
Hmm.
get the context of that, but that's not my experience, and I don't use that terminology because the heroes of our story, one is Jesus, and two
Yeah.
are the local leaders who are there the rest of the year. And so that would just be, that probably splintered off into 5 different conversations, but that's
No,
just
this
one
is good.
example.
This is one controversial thing that I do actually want to talk about, and I have my own stirring of the pot opinions here around this idea of the hero language or the savior. You know, there's a critique of the white savior and the white savior complex. And I actually think there has been a serious overreaction to that concept in the church that has led to people disengaging from vulnerable populations altogether for fear of doing no harm. And so I think there's critiques to go kind of both ways. I think there's a critique of, you know, if you're going on that 1 week mission trip and painting and, you know, just taking local people's jobs, I mean, to put it the most like bluntly, potentially taking local people's jobs by and paying for the plane tickets. And, you know, there's something really inefficient about that. And I've been on that trip and it impacted my life actually. So, you know, this isn't saying no good is happening there, but there's something that needs to be critiqued about that and to say, hey, are there more effective ways to alleviate poverty, to do good in the world? But there also, in my opinion, needs to be a critique of the response to when helping hurts that says, well, let's just stop helping. I had a mentor in college who was kind of like a spiritual mother to me. She was really influential in my life. And she's, you know, she was kind of quippy. She was an author. And she said, you know, when helping hurts, like I'm pretty sure helping always hurts. And so this notion that if we are going to become proximate to vulnerable populations, there is going to be hurt that happens in both directions as part of that engagement and that messy. And so it is easier, it is safer, it is more comfortable to just not engage and to silo ourselves in the suburbs, in the Christian suburbs, than to actually go in and actually risk having harm done to us, risk, and this is scarier for some people, risk causing harm because we don't know what we're doing by becoming proximate. And yet I don't think that the solution to that is to not get proximate. I think the solution to that is to engage wisely and to engage humbly and to engage with a posture of listening and learning first, and to go to read When Helping Hurts. You know, When Helping Hurts does not say stop helping. It says, when you help, do it this way. You know, and so to actually read the book, to do the things it says, and then to engage in a more thoughtful way. But I think that there has been harm done by the overreaction to this fear of being the white savior, being, you know, and then just retreating and kind of justifying inaction.
I would agree with that. We mentioned the Becoming Whole book. I think it does a really good job of like addressing what is my poverty. Like even in my poverty might not be material, but we all have poverty, whether it's spiritual, material, whatever it is. And I think the writers of When Helping Hurts would say the same thing. The intent of When Helping Hurts was not to stop people from helping. It was to raise awareness of how to help in a better way. And in the circles that I work in with particularly orphan widow care, as far as going to like conferences, we're going to talk about how we've kind of expanded that more to vulnerable communities. But I feel like a lot of people would say you shouldn't do short-term missions if you're working in those communities. And I would push back on that and say, maybe like the painting a building days are over, but there are opportunities it's almost like an exposure, a learning, a prayer trip, a relationship building. And we found that sometimes that's not well received, because sometimes we want to be like, well, if I'm taking a week off of work, I want to have something to show for my time. And maybe that showing is going to be a more delayed gratification and a long-term effect instead of a quick fix. But again, I enjoy those conversations as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think the root is humility, right? Like, are we engaging with humility where it's not about us feeling useful, but it's actually about the well-being of the communities that we're engaging with? And I totally agree with you that the learning and educational opportunity of being on the ground in another country is amazing. And I hope all of our listeners get experiences to travel and to see the world and to see that not everyone lives the same way, but having the humility of being like, I'm just here to learn.
Yeah.
Emily, you were gonna say something.
Yeah, actually, I feel like Brian and I are on the same wavelength right now because I was just thinking about like there is no solution, but I feel like the posture that we can take, and I think the greatest almost like antidote to this problem of like Brian mentioned, like white savior complex or fear of being hurtful in our desire to help is this posture of humility. And even in, I feel like, other aspects beyond ministry, I think the language of even choosing like cultural humility indicates a heart posture versus like cultural competence, which kind of indicates this degree of like, oh, I've got it and now I can do it. But I think humility requires a constant learning that I think
Yeah.
is really uncomfortable because it's hard to do and I don't think it's intuitive to us because we kind of live, you know, even our senses are geared to us as individuals. Um, but I also really liked what you mentioned, Sarah Beth, about how sometimes like the trip is could be a vision trip. It could be a relationship building trip. And I also struggled a lot as I was like learning about all these things in like social sciences. Like I've grown up same way, like painting buildings, like those type of mission trips, that's very familiar to my youth group. Even now, but I think I kind of struggled with that. It was all that I had known, and now I'm kind of becoming aware of how might this actually not be helpful for the communities that we're going into. Um, but how can I kind of like navigate that? And like, what do I believe? And I think I'm still learning those things, but I really liked how you mentioned sometimes those trips might not be to build anything tangible, but more to encourage maybe ministry leaders there. Maybe it's to give vision to the people going and seeing where their heart is going to be led. Um, I know on one of my experiences and like mission trips when I was in youth group, I think I also felt very like, I'm not sure what we did here. And it created a degree of like skepticism and maybe guilt because I was like, I'm not sure if this benefited the people that we desired to benefit. And I'm not sure if this was helpful in the long run. But I also feel like our pastor was talking about how the inadequacy we feel in short-term mission often also fuels long-term missionaries or just long-term vision for the heart for populations that are more at risk for certain things like materialistic poverty. But I think that kind of navigation and even the language that we use, like a mission trip versus a vision trip
Right.
versus like, a
A
trip
learning
to
trip,
a learning
potentially,
trip, just like a trip
Mm.
to encourage maybe even the people going, to experience what does God look like here versus what have I always known. So I really liked your language on that, but I also felt like it kind of led into my own question of how do you kind of see this in 127 Worldwide? Like, how do you see maybe the distinctions between maybe what you've grown
Mm.
up with versus like what are you kind of like gearing towards? Yeah, I was just curious on what that looks like now that you've kind of like um, had a greater understanding of what these things mean for you specifically too.
Yeah, yeah. Kind of like what we were saying earlier. What mistakes have I made that now I can prevent other people from hopefully making? Um, I'm agreeing with all of what you guys are saying. Kind of the visual that we have for 127 is we want to be the bridge that connects people. So we even call our short-term teams are called connect teams. So I love you even mentioned that having a different kind of
I love
perspective.
that.
Like the primary reason we want you to go is to connect you with the work that's already happening there. So you'll know how to pray, you'll know how to advocate, you'll know what the financial needs are if you choose to give. And so I think that shift was very helpful. And then we have a separate kind of team that's called an equip team, And those are more like, what are some long-term sustainable solutions? Like we have some agricultural people who will go and teach like fish farming or pig farming or pasture training. Like what are deposits that we can make into this community that's going to be going to provide long-lasting results? And so those are kind of the two categories that how we mobilize most people in the US. And so that was very clarifying for us. And then this image of the bridge is, we want to help people on one side of the bridge understand what's happening and know who to trust and what's going on the other side of the bridge. And just my personality fits really well with that because I'm a networker. I love to connect people. I love to make recommendations. And so part of my job is, again, storytelling to people in the US of like, oh, you're interested in pig farming. Let me show you a guy in Uganda who's changing his community by teaching families how to grow pigs. And again, it's nothing that I know. I don't know anything about pig farming. I just love connecting people. And so I think that image kind of helps us to be like, oh, we're the facilitator. And that gives us a role that kind of let us do the work, let us vet the partners, let us put our reputation on the line for the work that's happening. And then your church, your family, your friends can feel more comfortable about, what's happening 8,000 miles away.
Yeah. Then tell us more about your local partners. What sorts of projects do they implement, and then how does 127 come alongside them to support them?
Yeah, that's a little bit tricky because it's hard for us to explain what we do other than that bridge is kind of a newer picture, because we currently have 5 partners. We have 2 in Kenya, 1 in Uganda, 1 in Guatemala, and we just added a partnership in Nepal, the end of 2024. And so if you try to explain like what do these people do, they all have like the common thread is they work with vulnerable people in their communities. And so that
how do you define
definition?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. That definition has expanded. So 127 worldwide is named after James 127. Pure religion is taking care of orphans and widows. And very early on in the organization, we realized we don't just want to help people who are already orphans and widows. We want to work upstream to prevent new orphans from happening. Like, what are ways we can strengthen families? We can educate kids who maybe are still living with families, but in, vulnerable situations. Very early on, we had a partner who worked in the slums in Nairobi and Kibera. It's the second largest slum in the world.
Yeah.
And they were not orphans. They live with their family, but it's like, how can we help these people just break the generational cycle of poverty and help the local leaders pour into those communities? And so as that started to expand, I think the idea of James 127 isn't just people who don't have a mother and a father and who have lost their spouse. I think it's like, look out for, in the Bible, they talk about the sojourner and people, like, be aware of people around you who need something, who can benefit from those relationships. And so I've loved watching that expand, where our partnership in Guatemala is with a church. They have a deaf community that really was growing, particularly throughout COVID, just kind of like building community. Everyone was wearing a mask, so they couldn't read lips. And so this deaf community just started teaching the Guatemalan Sign Language, and we've really seen that continue to grow over the last few years. And then in Nepal, we're working with a guy who's working with women who've been trafficked or at risk from being trafficked out in the villages. So he has like an internal ministry out in the rural areas, and then in the city, just kind of a rehab and a rescue mission. Like, that is a definition of vulnerable community. So I've kind of enjoyed watching that expand and just seeing what opportunities God has brought over the last few years to kind of stretch our thinking of what this means of empowering vulnerable communities.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that makes 127 worldwide actually really unique, is that you put the emphasis on your mission on building a bridge with local leaders and empowering local leaders. And that's kind of the focus. Whereas a lot of other nonprofits, they have a thing that they're doing, and that you might even use, like, they quote unquote use local leaders to implement their programs, and that language is not great. I guess using people is never great. But you've actually said, we're going to hold what particular impacts are happening on the ground with open hands and be open to new ideas. that are generated by local people that we trust. And instead, we're actually just going to invest in people instead of investing in a solution, a quote unquote solution. And I think that's really powerful because if we come up with our solution and then find the local leaders that we can implement our solution, that's completely different than saying, how can I find local people I can trust and then invest in those people and let them implement whatever solutions make the most sense to them in their contexts.
It's definitely not the easiest way to do ministry. I will say that, but I feel like it is the best way. So all of our partners have their own nonprofits that they were already doing before they met us. And so we're not coming in trying to, the one in Guatemala, it's a church, it's a pastor of a church. So that's a little bit different. The other 4 have their own established NGO in their country. So we have 0 127 staff that live overseas, which I feel like a lot of Americans really struggle with that. Like, who is telling you what's really going on and all those kind of questions about corruption, which it goes back to like this long-term relationship of slow building, lots of conversations, lots of listening, lots of trust. And I get it. Like it's not the easiest way, but I do think it's the best way.
So how do you form those strong relationships, across the geographic and the cultural divide?
Yeah. So the first 3 were the Kenyan lady. I mean, really, we were pen pals in 2007. That developed a lot of that curiosity. The next 2 were from East Africa as well. And that shows kind of where my heart is. Like, Kenya and Uganda is where I've spent most of my time internationally. And I'm quick to tell our partners too, like we're putting our reputation on the line. And so that's critical. Like, it's not something that I take lightly. So we're kind of slow to enter into a partnership. And then once we're there, we want to be all in. And so lots of hard conversations, lots of I love what you said about cultural humility. I think that's very important, to be open-handed, but sometimes it does mean you have to have hard conversations when you're working with different cultures who maybe don't prioritize having a budget a year in advance, things like that. Impact measurement, Emily, I'm not kidding. I'd love to talk to you more about that. That's very difficult when you're mostly dealing with people who are they've been taught to survive the day. And so to think through what is a long-term effect of this program that you've been doing for 10 years, it's been exciting to see the progress, but it's slow. I tell people a lot of 127 work, it's like watching a tree grow. Like you can't really see things from day to day, but in a few years, when you look back, you're like, oh, wow, like this is really working. It's just not at a super speed that we would like to see as Americans.
Yeah, I love that metaphor. So I think that nonprofit work, the best metaphors and images that we use for nonprofit work are organic and biological, not mechanic and technical. And the reason for that is because, nonprofits are entering into these complex social systems with living things, these living things called human beings. And actually, human beings are amazingly complex. Where we are, it's not like you stick a human being into some sort of machine and out pumps, a transformed human being. And, like you take any cause area, take behavioral health and addiction recovery, you take the best of the best with programs that are designed to help people recover from addictions. And it's not going to be 100% successful, first of all, not even close. And second of all, just because someone goes through the program and is doing well doesn't mean they won't relapse. And, there's something really hard about that. But the reality is that we are living creatures. And so we need this understanding of, the work that we're doing to heal broken systems and broken social systems as being, like there's diseases and we're coming in, we're trying to do the best we can. Sometimes there's comorbidities, there's multiple diseases. Sometimes the intervention is not completely effective. So it's a little bit more like medicine than it is like engineering. And I think having that also should bring us a lot of humility, that we are like, what does health mean? As an organization, institution, unfortunately, a lot of nonprofits are trying to heal broken systems when on the inside of the nonprofits themselves are not healthy social systems.
I think that's very common, actually.
Yes, and there's their own reasons for that. But I think for funders, and part of this podcast is for funders, for funders to invest in health for nonprofits and to invest in healthy nonprofits. To say things like, actually, on average, nonprofit staff are underpaid, not overpaid. There are examples of nonprofit staffs who are overpaid. On average, they're underpaid. That results in burnout. It results in high rates of turnover, and less healthy institutions that actually hinder the performance of the organization and the accomplishing of the mission. And so just even things like that. I'm giving you all my hot takes, Sarah Beth. You can always disagree with me.
I'm enjoying it.
But
you like to stir the pot as well.
I sure do. But I love that you're talking about entering into these systems, cross culturally, with a lot of humility, with and because I think that's how we achieve health in social systems is through humility.
I love the theme of humility. I have to be careful because you can't really say like, oh, we've really grown to be so humble. Like, you can't talk about it.
And
but
Moses
I
was
share
the most humble man in the world.
Yeah, I do share a lot that I feel like I think God has gifted me with a personality that's very open-handed.
Yeah.
I know my dad always used to say you should hire people who are better than you at the things that you're not good at, and then let them do that. Like, don't get in their way. And I think the same thing of just like being open-handed, of like, we see this all the time in the Bible. Like, God uses unlikely people to accomplish his work. And I feel like I'm a very unlikely person. And I guess there's humility in that, but there's also an acknowledgement of like, I'm okay living open handed and just trusting that, God's going to bring the staff here. He's going to take the staff away when it's time. And that's been really neat, just to see the longevity in the 14 years that God has been faithful to work through that. And I guess the challenge is for me to keep my hands open and to keep that posture. That's kind of an ongoing battle for me.
On the note of like open-handedness, I was just wondering, since you're like talking about all these partners, but also even like your staff and this posture of like being open-handed, which I think is honestly very hard for me, like to like be able to have this openness to always learning from people, especially when I think it can highlight my flaws. So I think that's a really beautiful strength to be able to have that and to practice that, because I do think like these things are practiced. But I was wondering, like during that, in this time, like whether it's like right now or in these past 14 years, what are some things that, whether it's like about your own culture, like American culture, that I know you like mentioned earlier, like, oh, how we kind of emphasize efficiency, we want to see results quickly, or if it's just like personally, spiritually, or even in just leading a nonprofit or this type of cause, like what are some things that you've kind of learned from like all your partners, or just like, like it could be cultural differences or just things in like your own walk, but do you have anything that you can share in terms of like what you've learned from this open-handedness?
Yeah, Brian, she's a good question asker. You need to keep her around.
We're going to keep her around. Oh, yeah, for sure.
I think I tell this story a lot, but I think of Joshua in the Bible, how he was mentored by Moses. He saw Moses split a sea, and that kind of maybe that made it easier for him. He circumcised grown men in the next chapter, and at some point he has the confidence to ask God to make the sun stand still. And I think like he had seen God's faithfulness in the past, and it made it easier to trust him when it didn't make sense in the future. And ironically, I think we kind of are in a season like that at 127 right now, where I'm not sure what God's doing with some of our staff situations and adding a new partner in Nepal. We're looking to add even more partners in the next few years. And I think that is kind of when I'm praying for this open-handedness to continue, it's God, I know you've been faithful. You've brought the people here who we needed in the past. And I'm just going to trust that that's what you're going to continue to do. It's easier said than done. I will say that. But I think we do have some good examples in the Bible of people who did that well. So
I think, or go ahead, Emily.
Oh, no, I was gonna say, it's actually crazy. I love that because I've actually reading through Joshua right now. So even
Good.
yesterday I read Joshua, but on Sunday, um, my pastor spoke about the exact same thing about being
Oh,
able to
wow.
trust in what God has already done in his faithfulness in the past, and how that leads
Mm.
us to have faith, which isn't blind in a sense, because we know his character, and being able to trust and have faith in the future of what God will do. So I just think like somehow all these things I'm learning, I get to like also learn from you, and what you've
Yeah.
experienced is actually very encouraging, like even just
Well,
personally. So was just a little side tangent, but I was really
thank
glad to
you.
share.
I think I
Yeah.
need the reminder myself, so it's been helpful for me too.
What other advice? I would count that as advice for nonprofit leaders, Sarah Beth, what you just shared, just because it is a journey of trust and faith, and to have a job and to lead an organization that is actually dependent on the giving and the generosity of people. And you can't control that. You can't control how people give. You
Hmm.
can invite, you can, cultivate a relationship, but then to actually have this sort of constant dependency. But what advice would you give to someone who wanted to start a nonprofit?
This is where I've stirred the pot again, but my first response when someone asks me that is, I think I mentioned earlier, if there's any way you can do what God's called you to do without starting your own organization, I would say go for that. And
So
even
so
now,
your
14
advice is
years,
don't.
that shouldn't be your first instinct. Let me say that. And I'll tell you why, because I started the organization to do the work that I've now hired other people to do. And
Right.
my main job is fundraising and all the logistics and the details that kind of go along with that. Um, Not just fundraising, but it's like I love storytelling.
Yep.
I love building relationships. That is a lot of fundraising, but my actual job has very little to do with being that bridge that connects people, or it's
Right.
become less and less that. And so I think if you start your own, you're actually not going to get to do what you feel like God is calling you to do individually. Now, sometimes I know God's continuing to call people to start new nonprofits. I'm not just like no, we don't need any more. But I would say just do your research and make sure that that is what God wants you to do, because it comes at a big sacrifice of not getting to do the things that you think you want to do. Now, other people on our staff travel to visit our partners more than I do because I'm here telling the story and trying to raise money. Um,
Can I just respond to that real quick? I just think
yeah.
it's wonderful that you named that. And at the start of this conversation, we were talking about the difference between going on a short-term mission trip and painting a classroom because you want to feel useful, and
Mm-hmm.
having the humility to say, hey, actually we can empower local leaders. And I just think what you just named of saying, we started this because we felt like there was a need, and then for you to um, say what would be best for the mission. It's actually not me even making these trips anymore. It's actually me raising money, which you know I know lots of nonprofit executive directors, and no one goes into the work because they want to raise money. like,
I didn't even think that was going to be my job 14 years. It never crossed my mind that that would be my job.
but what I love and what I think is admirable about you, Sarah Beth, is that when the time came in building this organization, where you're like, it would be best for the organization, best for the ministry, best for the people on the ground, for me to spend my time fundraising, that you did it and you pivoted and you're doing what's needed and not just what feels good in terms of a career. And I just wanted to name that. I think that's kind of this idea of humility that we were talking about. And it's so hard, in our culture, like our careers are the thing that fulfill us. And I know you enjoy fundraising and you're very good at it. So, I'm not saying it's like this, horrible test, but I am saying it's like, you know, and I feel this way as well. Like it's more fun to be in the field. It's
Mm-hmm.
more fun than to be, saying the same stories over and over again and trying to get people to care about the mission, and they're not caring like we
Yeah.
care, and so that's hard. And so I just wanted to just encourage you of like that sacrifice is a real sacrifice, and I hope our listeners see that and hear that. And I think is another example of humility.
Thank you. I can learn a few lessons from you about fundraising. And I didn't want to portray that I never get to go. I do get to
I'm a
go
very mediocre
sometimes.
fundraiser, but sorry. I'm going to stop interrupting you, Sarah Beth. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. I do still get to go, so I didn't want people to like feel sorry for me that I never get to go. But
Yeah.
it's funny because like my heart feels most at home in Kenya, and I would say on a monthly basis, somebody asks me why I don't move to Kenya. And I think the irony of like God literally asked me to start an organization where the premise is I don't need to live in Kenya because there are capable, strong leaders who already live there who are doing the work. So I resonate with what you're saying, but I didn't want people to feel like I never got to travel. I do
Yeah.
still get to some, just not as much as I would like.
Your dose of chapati and chai tea and
Yes.
samosas.
Yes.
Good giraffe
sure.
pics. Kenyan hospitality. There's so much to love. I want to go to East Africa. You should tell me next time you're going, and I would want to go with you if I can.
Yeah. That's great.
Well, let's I have a couple more questions just to wrap up our conversation today. One is, why should Christians give to support the work of 127 Worldwide? Like what is the like why could giving to support your work be, like something people can do as part of their like discipleship and apprenticeship to Jesus?
Yeah, of course, I do have a biased opinion. We've talked about some of the ways in the last 45 minutes, but I do love our unique model of connecting. I love the model or the picture of the bridge, and I think it cuts out some of people's hesitations to give. It's like we've done a lot of the work of like vetting people. We have a partner granting program where we're teaching our partners how to apply, almost like we're a foundation. So they have to give measurement and their intent, and they have to report back to what, after we give them the money, we need like a 6-month report of what's happening. And so I think it kind of takes out a lot of the ambiguity and the questions about donors are sometimes hesitant to give because they don't know a lot of that's happening. So it's like we're kind of the middleman that does that. And then we're very gospel centered, even through pig farming and fish farming. It's these empowering families, strengthening the local church, strengthening communities. We're not just a humanitarian organization to break the cycle of poverty, material poverty. There really is the gospel is a thread through everything we do. So I'd say those are kind of the two main things that would stick out to me.
Awesome. And what are you learning these days about what it means to love generously like Jesus?
I feel like that was a big shift for your last question, but I would say in the last few years, I've learned a lot about community. And again, I feel like American Christianity has kind of missed the mark. We've become more insular, more inward focused. And I think we haven't really talked about this, but I call myself a prolonged single. I'm never married, and that wasn't really my plan. So it's like I'm kind of wrestling with that spiritually between me and the Lord of like, this isn't the life I thought I was going to have. And as I talk to people, I feel like a lot of people my age, whether they're married or not, are having those same, my life didn't turn out the way that I wanted. And I love the East African culture of community. And I feel like we really miss the mark in America of living in our suburbia ignorance in some points, like especially in the winter, like we go straight into our homes and don't really get to know other people. And so again, I'm just really loving the challenge of like looking at what Jesus did. He had his inner circle of 3, he had 12, and then he kind of expanded those spheres of influence. And like how have we missed that? How can we grow more into that? Just living authentically and transparently with other people. That's something I'm not willing to surrender to quite yet.
Sarah Beth, I love that you said that because, like Brian knows, I always love talking about community and people. But I was wondering, I know we talked a lot, especially about 127, about how we can learn from the communities like cross-culturally and what we can do to kind of support that through this model of empowerment rather than us trying to implement anything over there. But I think especially for people who are not engaged in that sort of thing or beyond just like fundraising or in the nonprofit world, like what are some ways that you think we can implement community and love our community and kind of practice those things, because I think one of my favorite things about learning about culture at school was the fact that we are agents of change and we have power to change culture. Like, culture is like meant to be dynamic. It is in its nature, I feel like, active and always changing, which I think gives us a lot of hope and encouragement. But what are some things that you think we can do, like action items maybe, to kind of implement and see that change that we want to see here, even in like our suburbs of America?
I feel like that might be a separate whole podcast. We could talk for another hour, but I'll just say a few sentences. For me, it's been to be persistent. I feel like you kind of want to invite people over and assume it's going to be reciprocated, and then when it's not reciprocated, you stop trying. And I think in our culture, that's not going to work. You're going to have to keep being persistent, keep look around, like who is reciprocating, and just trust that maybe that's who God wants you to spend time and invest your life more one-on-one with. But it's not ever going to come naturally. Like, our world is so busy and distracted and focused on this nuclear family. And as a single person, I would say, if you're not single, look for the single people in your church who don't have that. I know in COVID, it felt very obvious to me when everyone's like, get in your bubble of people. And I live 9 hours away from my blood family. And I'm like, who are my people? Like, the church being the family is something that, again, this is a blanket statement. It's something we can do better as like loving each other as brothers and sisters, noticing who's around, who, I don't get invited to go to like Little League games because I don't have kids, but I'm like, I grew up playing Little League. Like, I would love to do that, but it looks kind of creepy if I just show up by myself. So invite your friends who don't have kids, and then trust if they don't want to come, they'll say no. But I think just kind of like stepping over to that a little bit uncomfortable, like maybe they're going to think I'm weird because I keep inviting them, but it's like, I think that's what it's going to take, is some radical action to kind of break the cycles that we've created.
So good, Sarah Beth. I do feel like we could do a whole other episode on this. This is such an important issue. It's such an important issue. And, it's like, if we're going to love people like Jesus, or love our neighbors, like, we actually can't even do that if we don't know our neighbors, like start. So maybe the like prerequisite to love your neighbor is know your neighbor, because you can't love a person you don't even know. And, and so I feel like we could totally do a whole other episode on it. I also just want to name that, like, having spent time in Kenya, this feels like a gift from East African cultures that we can take and receive, and just have an imagination for community that goes beyond, that nuclear family, but community that actually, this kind of like radical hospitality that's really all throughout East African culture. And, hopefully that's the kind of thing we can learn from other cultures too, how to do better. So thank you for your time.
They do it way better than us. So when the sun goes down, they sit around the fire and tell stories and sing together, and the women do laundry together. I mean, you really could get me started on, like, we don't like asking for help for anything. And that's really a way community is formed, is by like showing vulnerability, asking for help. So many things go against American culture. So again, that we could all three of us could stir another pot with that. Sometime.
Well, we might have to make that happen. Sarah Beth, thank you so much for your time today. Yeah. Thank you for all the work you're doing with 127 Worldwide, making an impact in Guatemala, Uganda, Kenya, and Nepal. I'm just very grateful for all you do. You can learn more about 127 Worldwide at 127worldwide.org. Check them out and give them some love and support. The invitation to grow this week is to start a conversation with someone from a different culture from you. This could be at your local coffee shop, or on an airplane, or at church. But get a rep in this week to build a relationship across a cultural difference through one conversation. Thank you to Michael Hansen for editing this episode, Grace Sukach for the podcast art, and of course to Sarah Beth Fentress for sharing your wisdom and insights with us. If you have feedback on this episode, you can reach me at brian@simplecharity.org. Next time on the show, we'll have Joshua Kurtz, who has a master's in sustainability with a focus on water, and my good friend Griffin Storm. And we're going to have a conversation about the progress that the world has made to provide safe drinking water to everyone on planet Earth and how far we still have to go. I hope you join me as we continue to learn to love generously like Jesus. Have a great rest of your week.